what salience you think the argument, and we had Angela Nagel on this program, I don't know, I guess it was 4 or 5 months ago, maybe, I'm not sure. But in her book, part of her argument is that the alt-right is at least in part a function of part of like the more shallow aspects, I guess, of the so-called social justice warrior culture. How much of that do you think has been fuel to this fire?
I honestly don't give that much weight. Those kind of arguments, I think, concern me on a couple levels. One, they deny conservatives autonomy. Like, they deny that they are autonomous people making decisions and paint them as purely reactive. And two, I think that there's an underestimating of how much, like, white men specifically, and white women also to a certain extent, really do have a good reason to want to maintain a social order that keeps them at the top of the pecking order, like the hierarchy, right? I think, the notion that I mean, I don't want to overstate her argument. It does seem to me that she is kind of suggesting that that a lot of the alt-right was sort of a formation of feeling like social justice warriors, for lack of a better term, like overstepped their bounds and were too provocative, right?
Right.
But I don't know that there's any way to threaten somebody's privileged status in society that doesn't provoke an angry reaction. So I feel a bit like that the only answer is just let them have their way, and I refuse to accept that answer.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So, I mean, there's a certain, to the extent that there is a catalyst or an inciting event, it's that other people besides white men and white women to a certain extent are not just emancipated, but are beginning to take some power in society.
Yeah, and there's no way that happens without a reaction. And I know that people wish that there was, but again, I point back to the 1960s as an example. The civil rights movement was met with violence, and in atrocious violence, and they deliberately organized in the least provocative way that they could, and they still were met with violence. So I think at a certain point, you have to say, the reason people get mad is not because of the way you're doing things, but because of what you're asking. And they do not want to give it.
And so, okay, and so we have this sort of zero-sum situation with in terms of power. In terms of the economic aspect of this, I mean, you touched on this just briefly, but just expand a little bit on why you or what your perspective is on the economic deprivation or frustration in that regard. Because I mean, there is, clearly, right. And I would tie into this. I mean, it's hard to, I guess, sort of disaggregate this stuff, but when you see towns that are devastated by opioid addiction, or when you see, consistent loss of wage growth and whatnot, how much can you attribute the rise of, I guess, of Donald Trump to that?
That's a really complicated question, and I feel like some of the answers people have been coming up with to flatten it out. And I don't want to deny that these towns with their shrinking jobs and their shrinking populations aren't contributing to it. But I do think one thing that's being overlooked is that our economy is changing, and what is happening in a lot of these rural areas is that people are giving birth to and raising kids there who then turn 18 and leave. Right. And and those kids, as one of those people, I am personally in one of those people. I grew up in a rural area, white conservative parents, and I left. And I live in New York City now, chase the opportunities and the lifestyle I wanted. And I think that there is resentment there that is cultural as well as economic, right? And I think that can't be overlooked. And it's frustrating because I think you see the same thing happen in England with Brexit. Was a lot of the older white people living in kind of more rural areas of England voted for Brexit because they resented that their kids were moving away and getting jobs in Italy and Greece and Germany, and they want them to stay home where they can see their grandkids every week. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I think that, it cannot be underestimated in terms of how people are considering their life circumstances and their current circumstances. And I guess that's the biggest takeaway I want people to have from this book is that culture matters. Things like family and power and status matter. It's not just money. And money is important, but it is far from the only thing.
Amanda Marcott, the book is Troll Nation, How the Right Became Trump-Worshipping Monsters, set on rat-effing liberals, America, and truth itself. That's quite a subtitle. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.